we're going to talk about a decorated hero of the American Revolution, someone who fought bravely, was wounded in combat, got an honorable discharge, the whole deal. But after the war on the battlefield was over, she had to start a second and maybe even tougher battle right here at home. Okay, just listen to this. In a public speech she gave in 1802, that same war hero, Deborah Sampson, said this. She says she'll sit down inglorious for having done something meant for someone else. I mean, read between the lines. That is a straight-up apology for her own heroism. She's calling her incredible actions an unfortunate performance. And that really brings us to the big question here. Why? Why would a celebrated hero, praised for her courage, feel like she had to publicly say sorry for the very things that made her famous? The answer to that question, well, it tells an amazing story about identity, survival, and just how rigid the world was back in the 18th century. So, to understand her second battle, we've got to start with her first one. This is the story of her time in uniform. But here's the thing. To the Continental Army, she wasn't Deborah Sampson at all. They knew her as a young man named Robert Shurtleff. So, how in the world did she pull this off? Well, it's 1782, she's 21 years old, and she is determined to fight in the war. Problem is, the army only takes men. So, what does she do? She takes matters into her own hands. She cuts her hair, binds her chest, gets a man's suit of clothes, and literally creates a whole new identity. And just like that, Robert Shurtleff joins the 4th Massachusetts Regiment. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. This was a serious, high-stakes plan. For the next 17 months, her life was just constant danger. And I'm not just talking about British cannons and muskets. No, she had to worry about the daily, even hourly risk of being discovered by the men fighting right alongside her. And her military career was a whirlwind for sure. She enlists in May, and not even a month later, boom, she's in combat and gets wounded. As a light infantryman, her job was to go on these incredibly dangerous scouting missions. Then a year later, a deadly fever almost kills her, which is what ultimately leads to her secret getting out. By October 1783, her time as a soldier was over. The physical risks she was taking were just unreal. In one fight, she took a deep sword gash right to her forehead. A serious injury, no doubt, but one she could handle without a full medical exam that would have, given her away instantly. But then came an even closer call, a much closer call. During a skirmish, she gets hit not once, but twice by musket balls in her left thigh. This was a disaster waiting to happen, not just for her health, but for her secret. And the length she went to protect that secret, it's just mind-blowing. She was terrified that a surgeon would discover she was a woman, so she refused medical help. Instead, she took a penknife, and dug one of the musket balls out of her own leg. The other one? It stayed in her leg for the rest of her life, a constant, painful reminder. After all that, you'd think it would be a battle wound that finally gave her away. But nope, it was something way more ordinary, but just as deadly. An epidemic that was tearing through Philadelphia. So, in the summer of '83, she gets struck down by this terrible fever and is taken to a hospital, totally unconscious. The doctor treating her, a guy named Barnabas Binney, discovered the cloth she used to bind her chest and realized that the soldier everyone knew as Robert Shurtleff was actually a woman. But here's the twist. Instead of being punished or shamed for the deception, she was celebrated. Dr. Binney quietly told her commanding officer, and General Henry Knox himself signed her honorable discharge. Years later, Congress would praise her, saying there was literally no similar example of female heroism in the entire war. So her first battle, it ended in total honor. But that honorable discharge, well, it led directly to her second and, in a lot of ways, much harder battle. After the war, she went back home, married, had 3 kids. But life as a hero was anything but glorious. Her life became this wild contradiction. On the one hand, she was famous. A biography was written about her. She became the first American woman to ever go on a public speaking tour. But on the other hand, she and her family were living in poverty. The farm was a mess, and her old war wounds, especially that musket ball still in her leg, caused her constant pain. A neighbor put it pretty bluntly, they were really poor. And if you want to know just how poor, let me put it into perspective with one number, $10. That's how much this celebrated war hero had to borrow from her neighbor, you may have heard of him, Paul Revere, just to make ends meet. It was this desperation that made her fight for a military pension.
And Paul Revere, it turns out, became a really important ally in this new fight. He actually wrote a letter to a congressman on her behalf. But his letter, man, it reveals so much about the prejudices of the time.
So this is what Revere admitted he expected to meet. He thought a woman warrior would be this tall, masculine, uneducated, crude person. I mean, that was the stereotype she was fighting against. It just shows you what people thought a woman had to be to do a man's job. But then he actually met her, and this was his reaction. He was shocked. He found her to be small, effeminate, and well-spoken. What does that tell us? It tells us Sampson knew exactly how to play the game. To get support from powerful men, she had to perform the role of a proper, delicate lady. And this, right here, is the absolute core of her second battle. For her to get her pension, Paul Revere had to promise Congress that she had completely quitted the male habit. She wasn't Robert Shurtleff, the soldier, anymore. She was now a good wife and mother. Just think about that. Her financial survival literally depended on her rejecting the very identity that made her a hero in the first place. So all this, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? After a life spent playing these different roles, first a male soldier, then a perfect woman, who was the real Deborah Sampson? Historians have been debating this for centuries. What really drove her? Was it pure patriotism? Was it just a practical way to escape a life of poverty? Was it about grabbing the kind of freedom and adventure that only men were allowed at the time? Or was it something even deeper? A chance to live as her authentic self? We just don't have a simple answer. And that kind of leaves us where we started, with a question. Every big moment of her life depended on her performing a role to survive. She had to convincingly play a man to be a soldier, and then she had to convincingly play the ideal woman to get her pension for being that soldier. So you have to ask, underneath all those masks she had to wear, can we ever really know who she was? It makes her a truly compelling and maybe, just maybe, an unknowable American hero.